Welcome to the Academy of Sleep, your peaceful haven for calming lectures designed to help you drift off to sleep. I'm Mellow Matt, your soft-spoken narrator with a love for quiet stories, gentle facts, and late-night wonder. I'll be here to guide you into rest, one sleepy lecture at a time. If you enjoy our bedtime journeys and would like to support the channel, you can treat me to a warm virtual brew via Buy Me a Coffee. The link's in the description. Now settle in, take a deep breath, and enjoy tonight's lecture. Lost Civilizations of North America, History of the Iroquois, Apache, Navajo, Sioux, Cherokee, and beyond. Chapter 1, Before the Nations, the First Peoples and the Ice Age Migrations. Take a deep breath. Let your body soften and your thoughts grow quiet. Wherever you are, wherever your day has brought you, this moment is yours. You are safe here. You are welcome here. Tonight we begin a journey, not only through space, but through time. A journey into the distant past of North America, long before borders or nations, before names like Cherokee or Iroquois or Apache had yet formed, before even the first stone was set into a ceremonial mound. We go back to the beginning, to the earliest footsteps across a frozen bridge, to the first fires kindled beneath unfamiliar stars, to the first peoples of a vast and waiting world. It began more than 20,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, when immense ice sheets covered much of what we now call Canada and the northern United States. The world was colder then, drier in some places, wetter in others, and the seas were much lower. Between northeastern Asia and Alaska stretched a landmass we call Beringia, a 1,000-mile wide bridge of earth and tundra connecting Siberia to North America. Herds of mammoth and bison migrated across it, following the rhythm of seasons, and with them came the first humans. Small bands of hunter-gatherers, clothed in furs, armed with stone-tipped spears and ancient knowledge, moved across the land not in conquest, but in curiosity, in search of game, shelter, and perhaps a new life. These people were not empty of story. They carried with them languages and dreams, fire and myth. They did not think of themselves as migrants. They were simply living, as people always do, moving with the world, not against it. For a long time, they lived in Beringia itself, a land now mostly submerged beneath the Bering Sea. Archaeologists believe they may have remained there for several thousand years, isolated between ice sheets on either side, before the climate slowly began to shift. As glaciers retreated, beginning around 16,000 years ago, new pathways opened southward through an ice-free corridor between massive ice fields, or perhaps along the Pacific coast by boat and shoreline, where kelp forests and marine life offered sustenance. By 13,000 BCE, these early peoples had spread across the Americas. In Clovis, New Mexico, stone tools, known for their distinctive fluted spear points, were found alongside the bones of extinct megafauna like mastodon and giant sloths. For many decades, these Clovis tools were thought to represent the first widespread culture in North America, dating to roughly 11,000 BCE. But new evidence now suggests that humans had been here even earlier. Sites like Buttermilk Creek in Texas, Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania, and Monteverde in Chile have pushed back the timeline, revealing the deep antiquity of human presence on these lands, possibly as early as 15,000 to 18,000 years ago, and maybe even before. What we call prehistory was their present. They hunted mammoth and caribou, fished rivers, gathered seeds and berries, shaped tools from bone and obsidian. They moved in rhythm with the seasons, forming temporary camps along rivers and in valleys where life flourished. Some lived in hide covered tents, others in rock shelters or beneath the open sky. They knew the stars, not as abstractions, but as ancestors and guides. The land was not wilderness. It was alive, sacred, familiar. Every mountain had a name. Every river had a story. As the centuries passed, these early communities adapted to diverse environments. The forests of the Northeast, the deserts of the Southwest, the plains of the interior, the icy coasts of the North. By 8000 BCE, as the Ice Age came to a close and temperatures rose, glaciers retreated fully, and the great reshaping of the North American landscape began. The lakes we now know, the Great Lakes, Lake Tahoe, Crater Lake, formed from meltwater and volcanic collapse. Forests spread, animals migrated, and human life grew more varied. Hunting megafauna gave way to hunting deer and smaller game. Fishing became more important. Some groups began to stay longer in seasonal settlements, experimenting with early forms of cultivation. Wild maize, sunflower, squash, and other native plants were slowly nurtured. Agriculture had not yet taken hold, but its seeds, literal and figurative, had been planted. By 5000 BCE, distinct cultural regions were emerging. On the Great Plains, peoples began to shape flint tools specialized for hunting bison. In the eastern woodlands, early mound building practices had begun, low earthworks for burial and ceremony. Along the Pacific Northwest, shell middens and fishing villages appeared. These early regional traditions would become the foundation of later civilizations. The ancestors of the Cherokee and Iroquois in the east, the Sioux and Pawnee in the plains, the ancestral Puebloans in the southwest, the Haida and Tlinet in the north. But even now, so far back in time, their stories were already forming, not written in books or stone, but carried in memory, in song, in the way a fire was lit or a child was named. They had no cities, not yet, but they had knowledge of plants and weather, of seasons and spirits. They lived close to the land, and from this closeness came a worldview unlike that of the civilizations that would one day cross the ocean. The earth was not to be owned, but honored. The animals were not resources, but kin. The wind was not empty, but full of voice. Every stone, every stream, every cloud in the sky was part of a living system, sacred and real. And in this way of seeing, so different from the European mindset of centuries later, there was a kind of genius, a deep ecological wisdom, a spirituality without temples, a science without numbers, a philosophy written in footprints. It is easy to forget, looking back across so many millennia, that these early peoples were not building toward anything. They were not waiting to become Maya or Inca, not hoping to become Aztec or Egyptian. They were already whole, already complete. Theirs was not a path upward, but outward, into diversity, into relationship, into balance. And that is where we will follow them, into the forests and rivers, into the sacred mounds and the windswept plains, into the cliff dwellings and longhouses, the council fires and spirit dances, into the roots of what would later become the great tribal nations of North America. But for now, as we pause at the threshold of recorded memory, you may let your thoughts drift. Picture the first people standing at the edge of the continent, watching the stars rise over a new land. Imagine the crunch of ice beneath their feet, the breath of mammoth on the wind, the flicker of fire against a cave wall. Let yourself be still. Let the world be old. Let the land be vast, and time unfold like snow melting on stone. Chapter 2. The Meaning of Indian. Names, misnomers, and identity words carry weight. They shape how we see the world and how we are seen in return. They can illuminate or obscure, include or erase. And few words in the English language have carried as many layers of misunderstanding, simplification, and controversy as the word Indian. Tonight, we slow down to explore not just the peoples of North America, but the names by which they have been called, and the names they have always carried for themselves, deep within. The term Indian was born not from knowledge, but from error. In 1492, when Christopher Columbus landed in the Caribbean islands, he believed he had reached the eastern shores of Asia, what Europeans then called the Indies. The people he encountered were unfamiliar to him, and in his own flawed frame of reference, he named them Indios, Indians. The name stuck. It was used again and again by Spanish, French, English, and other European explorers as they encountered the vast and varied peoples of the Americas, from the tropical forests of Brazil to the icebound coasts of the Arctic. Over time, Indian became not a description, but a category, a single label used to define hundreds of unique cultures, thousands of languages and dialects, and an entire hemisphere of human experience. And yet, the people themselves had other names, older names, truer names, names given by ancestors and spoken in prayers. Among the Haudenosaunee, known to outsiders as the Iroquois, the people call themselves Ongwe, the original people, or real people. The Navajo call themselves Diné, meaning the people. The Apache R&D. The Inuit, often once called Eskimo by outsiders, use the term Inuit, which also means the people. These names are not generic. They are rooted in kinship, in cosmology, in language that reflects the way each culture sees itself and the world. To call oneself the people is not arrogance. It is belonging to the land, to the ancestors, to a shared thread of meaning that stretches back through time like smoke through pine trees. The word Indian, when applied across such a vast tapestry of nations, became a kind of flattening. It ignored differences in language, belief, and lifeways. It lumped together the Pueblo builders of the Southwest and the canoe makers of the Pacific Northwest, the bison hunters of the Great Plains, and the fisher folk of the Great Lakes. In the eyes of colonizers, this sameness made administration easier, and justification easier still. When peoples are nameless, they are easier to displace. When they are called by what they are not, it becomes easier to forget who they are. And yet, over time, the word evolved. In some places, Indian became a political term, used in legal documents and treaties and census rolls. In the United States, American Indian is still used in federal law to describe recognized tribal entities and individuals eligible for services and rights guaranteed by treaties and agreements. Some indigenous people reject the term entirely. Others use it freely, alongside or instead of other names. Many prefer Native American, a phrase that gained popularity in the late 20th century for its more inclusive and respectful tone. Others now use indigenous peoples, emphasizing the global context, connecting Native Americans to First Nations in Canada, Aboriginal Australians, Sami of northern Europe, and other original inhabitants around the world. Still, there is no universal preference. Some elders grew up with Indian and speak it with pride. Some activists use it defiantly. Some young people reclaim it through art, music, and resistance. And many move between terms native, indigenous, first people, Indian, depending on audience, context, or personal feeling. What matters most, perhaps, is that these words not be used as blankets, but as doorways, leading us to the more specific, more real identities that each nation holds within. Because these identities are not museum pieces, they are alive. There are more than 570 federally recognized tribes in the United States today, and over 600 First Nations in Canada, each with its own name, its own language, its own story. The Choctaw, the Ojibwe, the Haida, the Zuni, the Lakota, the Wampanoag, the Salish, the Hopi, the Shoshone, the Lumbee, the Yurok, the Nez Perce. Each name is a universe, a whole history of movement, of ceremony, of survival. To learn these names, to speak them with care, is to begin to see more clearly. In many native traditions, names are sacred. A name might be given in a vision. It might reflect a dream, a spirit animal, or a gift from the ancestors. Some names are not spoken publicly. Others change over time. A person might be known by one name as a child, another in adulthood, another in old age. Names are not labels. They are stories, condensed, luminous, and alive. So tonight, as we continue our journey into the ancient civilizations of North America, we pause to honor the power of naming. We recognize the weight of the word Indian, with all its tangled roots, colonial, legal, cultural, emotional. And we listen for the deeper names, the self names, the soul names, the ones whispered in origin stories, sung in lullabies, or carved into memory. Because to tell the story of a people, one must begin not with what they were called by others, but by what they called themselves. And perhaps, to truly understand, we must not only ask what they were called, but what they called the land, the wind, the stars, the place where the rivers meet. In those names, softly spoken and centuries deep, we may find not only identity, but invitation. An invitation to see the world not as outsiders looking in, but as guests, quiet, respectful, and ready to listen. Chapter 3: Cahokia, the City of Mounds and Stars. Before the towering temples of Tenochtitlan, before the pyramids of the Maya jungle cities, before the Spaniards set foot on any shore, a city rose in the heart of North America, vast, complex, and brilliant. Its name was not written in books, for its people did not write in letters. Its walls were not carved in stone, but built from earth, shaped by hands and will and ritual. We call it Cahokia, a modern name for an ancient place, located near present-day St. Louis, Missouri, along the eastern banks of the Mississippi River. It flourished during what scholars now call the Mississippian period, from around 1050 to 1350 CE, though its roots run deeper. It was the largest and most sophisticated city north of Mesoamerica, a center of trade, religion, governance, and cosmology, built not of stone, but of mounds and stars. At its height in the 12th century, Cahokia covered nearly 6 square miles and was home to an estimated 10,000 to 20,000 residents, with satellite communities spreading the total population of the region to over 40,000, a size rivaling medieval European cities like London or Paris at the same time. From above, its design revealed intention. Dozens of platform mounds, ceremonial plazas, wooden palisades, and residential districts were arranged with astonishing symmetry. At its center stood Monk's Mound, the largest earthen structure ever built in the Americas, towering over 30 meters high, with a base larger than that of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Constructed from over 22 million cubic feet of earth, moved basket by basket, Monk's Mound rose in four massive terraces, upon which likely stood a great wooden temple or the home of a priest king, a place where sky and earth, ruler and cosmos met. Cahokia was more than a city. It was a ceremonial engine, a place where calendar and ritual aligned. Near the central plaza stood a structure now known as Woodhenge, a circle of massive wooden posts that functioned as a solar observatory. On equinox mornings, the rising sun would align perfectly with specific posts, as seen from the center, marking the turning of seasons and signaling times for planting, harvest, and sacred celebration. The people of Cahokia did not merely track time, they lived within it, shaped by the rhythms of the stars above and the pulse of the river below. Archaeological discoveries reveal a society of remarkable complexity. There were social classes, with elite burials adorned in elaborate regalia, shells from the Gulf Coast, copper plates from the Great Lakes, mica from the Appalachian Mountains. Cahokia was not isolated. It was the hub of a sprawling trade network that stretched for thousands of miles. Goods moved through rivers, along trails, by canoe and on foot. Ideas moved too, stories, symbols, techniques. At the core of Cahokian art and belief was the Birdman figure, a recurring symbol thought to represent a sky deity or shamanic being connected to warfare, death, and resurrection. Engraved on shell cups and copper plates, this figure echoes the deep spiritual themes found across the Mississippian world. One of the most famous archaeological finds at Cahokia is the Burial 13 site, also known as the Birdman Burial, discovered beneath Mound 72. There, the remains of an elite male were laid atop a bed of more than 20,000 shell beads, arranged in the shape of a falcon. Around him were dozens of other burials, some clearly honored, others heartbreakingly sacrificed. The presence of young women, likely ritually killed to accompany him in death, points to the immense ritual and political power concentrated in Cahokia's elite, a society deeply structured by spiritual authority, celestial vision, and cycles of life and death. But Cahokia was not only sacred, it was also full of life. Farmers cultivated maize, beans, squash, and sunflower, the agricultural foundation of the Mississippian peoples. Markets bustled with traders and artisans. Children played in the shadows of mounds. Stories were told by firelight. Music of drums, flutes, and rattles echoed across the plaza. And above it all, the stars turned, mirrored in the flowing waters of the Mississippi, which the people saw not just as a river, but as a path between worlds. Then slowly, the city declined. By 1350 CE, its population had diminished dramatically. The reasons remain unclear. Climate change, particularly a period of drought and flooding known as the Little Ice Age, may have stressed the agricultural system. Deforestation and resource depletion likely played a role. Internal unrest, social inequality, or disease may have contributed. There is no record of invasion, no conquest by outside armies. Cahokia did not fall in fire. It faded, swallowed by time, forgotten by history, until its mounds were rediscovered centuries later, grown over with grass mistaken for natural hills. Today, Monk's Mound still stands, silent, enduring. The site is preserved as the Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You can walk its grounds, climb its ancient heights, and feel the breath of a lost city beneath your feet. There are no stone temples, no golden statues, no written glyphs, and yet it was a city of vision, built with earth and meaning, aligned with the heavens, humming with ritual. To remember Cahokia is to challenge the myth that North America had no civilizations, no cities, no grandeur before the arrival of Europeans. It is to rediscover a chapter of history written not in books, but in soil and starlight. It is to see that the people who built mounds as vast as pyramids, who watched the skies and shaped their world accordingly, were not wandering bands of primitives, but architects of time, citizens of a world as complex and sacred as any in the ancient world. And so tonight, as you rest, imagine the city once more. The flicker of torchlight across the plaza, the sound of footsteps on packed earth, the sun rising over Woodhenge, casting long shadows through the posts, and the people, farmers, priests, mothers, dancers, living their lives in rhythm with the stars. Let the mounds rise behind your eyes. Let the past be vast and quiet and real. Let the city of Cahokia return to you, not as ruins, but as memory. Chapter 4. The Mound Builders, Adena, Hopewell, and the Serpent of Ohio. Long before the rise of Cahokia, before great wooden temples stood atop earthen platforms and solar alignments marked the sacred rhythms of time, there were other mound builders, peoples whose names we may never know, but whose works endure in the quiet landscapes of the Ohio River Valley, where forests whisper over grass-covered hills that were shaped not by nature, but by careful, deliberate hands. We call these ancient people the Adena and the Hopewell, not because that is what they called themselves. Their names were lost long ago, but because of modern archaeological labels tied to sites where their traces were first studied. They lived in the eastern woodlands of North America between approximately 1000 BCE and 500 CE in what is now Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, West Virginia, Kentucky, and beyond. These were not empires. There were no cities in the way we understand them, no stone monuments or centralized rulers. Instead, they left behind something subtler and in some ways more enduring. They left behind earth, shaped, raised, aligned, mounds, circles, geometries on the land that speak of ritual, of mystery, and of a relationship to the sky that we are only beginning to understand. The Adena culture, flourishing between 1000 BCE and 200 BCE, was one of the first to build burial mounds in this region. Low, rounded hills constructed over graves that often contained finely made grave goods, carved stone pipes, beads, copper ornaments, and intricately worked tools. Their people lived in small villages, grew native plants like goosefoot and knotweed alongside hunted game, and built ceremonial structures of wood and thatch. These mounds were not random. They were sacred. Each one was a monument to memory, to ancestors, to lineage, to the journey from life to death and beyond. And they were built not once, but layer upon layer over generations, each burial adding to the height, each ritual shaping the earth a little more. From these foundations, the Hopewell tradition emerged, roughly from 200 BCE to 500 CE, a term now used to describe a complex network of culturally connected peoples who expanded upon the Adena practices and created some of the most astonishing earthworks in ancient North America. The Hopewell did not build cities, but they did create monumental ceremonial complexes, massive geometric enclosures, some nearly a kilometer across, in the shapes of squares, circles, and octagons, often aligned with astronomical events. At Newark, Ohio, the Great Circle earthworks and Octagon earthworks stand as silent observatories, their walls rising gently from the land, tracing paths of the moon's movements over an 18.6-year cycle. This knowledge of lunar patterns, so precise as so vast in scale, suggests not only astronomical observation, but a culture deeply attuned to the cycles of nature, the breath of time, the subtle pull of celestial rhythms. The Hopewell's ceremonial centers were places of gathering, trade, ritual, and perhaps pilgrimage. Artifacts found in their mounds reveal a continent-wide trade network. From the Great Lakes came copper, from the Gulf Coast, marine shells, from the Rocky Mountains, obsidian, from the Appalachians, mica. These materials were not used for war, but for beauty, for ceremony, for offerings. They crafted animal effigy pipes, some shaped like birds, bears, or panthers, carved with exquisite precision and likely used in rituals involving smoke, breath, and transformation. The Hopewell worldview, though lost to time, can still be glimpsed in these objects, symbolic, elegant, deeply spiritual. But perhaps the most haunting legacy of these early mound builders lies in southern Ohio, near the town of Peebles, where a strange shape coils through the landscape, a shape so massive it can only be fully seen from above. This is the Great Serpent Mound, a sinuous earthwork over 400 meters long, depicting a serpent with a coiled tail and an open mouth, inside which rests an oval, perhaps an egg or a sun, or a symbol whose meaning we may never fully know. The mound is aligned with the summer solstice sunset and possibly lunar events, adding to its aura of sacred geometry and sky-bound meaning. Its exact age is debated. Some suggest a Hopewell origin around 300 BCE. Others argue for a later date, during the Fort Ancient culture, around 1070 CE, but its presence is undeniable. To stand near it is to feel the echo of ceremony, the quiet breath of something immense, thoughtful, and transcendent. The serpent winds across the ridge like a living thought, made of earth. These mounds, the circles and effigies, the burials and embankments, are not ruins in the traditional sense. They are not collapsed buildings or broken statues. They are shapes, gentle, enduring, almost too subtle for a hurried eye to notice. They invite slowness. They require listening, and they speak of a culture where the line between the land and the spirit world was soft, where death was not an end but a passage, and where geometry was not merely mathematics, but a language of the sacred. By the 6th century CE, the Hopewell tradition began to decline. No dramatic collapse, no armies or cataclysm. Instead, a slow fading, a transition into new regional cultures. Some suggest changes in climate or trade patterns. Others point to shifting religious beliefs or social transformations. But their memory did not vanish. Later cultures, the Mississippians, the Fort Ancient, the Oneota, inherited aspects of their mound-building tradition, reshaped and repurposed it for new times and places. Today, many of these mounds still rise from the earth, protected by parks, studied by archaeologists, honored by the descendants of the land's first peoples. At Mound City, Hopewell Culture National Historical Park, Serpent Mound, and dozens of other sites, the past waits quietly beneath the sky. You may walk among them, you may touch the grass that grows from ancient hands. You may feel, in the stillness, the weight of time, not heavy, but present. The Adena and Hopewell did not write books, but they wrote with earth, and the earth remembers. So tonight, as you rest, let your thoughts drift eastward to the river valleys and green woods, to the quiet embankments shaped in sacred circles, to the serpent that sleeps on the hill. Let the world slow. Let the stars rise. Let the stories told in earth speak once more of journeys, of ancestors, of the long and winding path that brought the first peoples of this continent to the sacred task of shaping land into memory and memory into time. Chapter 5: The Peoples of the Eastern Woodlands, Clans, Forests, and Confederacies. The forests of the East stretch deep and wide, from the Great Lakes to the Atlantic coast, from the northern edges of Canada to the gentle mountains of Appalachia. Before cities paved the land and borders divided it, this was a world of dense canopies, rivers like silver veins, and a seasonal rhythm that shaped every life that called it home. Here, beneath the rustling of leaves and the flight of birds, lived the many peoples of the eastern woodlands, not a single culture, but a vast and interconnected world of tribes, clans, languages, and lifeways that developed over thousands of years. By the time of European contact in the 16th and 17th centuries, this region was home to some of the most politically sophisticated and socially organized indigenous nations in North America. But their roots stretch far deeper into the time of mound builders, ancient trade, and ancestral memory. These peoples spoke diverse languages, including Algonquian, Iroquois, and Sioux language families, and included tribes such as the Lenape, Delaware, Powhatan, Ojibwe, Miami, Shawnee, Narragansett, Abenaki, and Pequot in the northeast, the Cherokee, Tuscarora, and Catawba in the south, and the powerful nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, also known as the Iroquois, in the region of present-day New York and parts of southern Canada. Each of these peoples lived according to their own customs, yet they shared certain patterns shaped by the forested land itself, a land of abundant game, fertile soil, flowing rivers, and seasons that called for careful preparation and deep respect for change. Villages were often built along rivers, surrounded by fields where maize, beans, and squash, the three sisters, grew together in mutual support, the tall corn providing structure, the beans adding nitrogen to the soil, and the squash covering the ground to retain moisture and deter weeds. These were more than crops. They were sisters in the old stories, spirits who had agreed to live among the people, women who often held power over land and agriculture, tended these gardens with knowledge passed through generations. Men hunted deer and elk, fished with nets and spears, and sometimes journeyed on long trading expeditions through the forest trails that crisscrossed the continent. Homes were tailored to the land. In the north, longhouses built from elm bark and bent saplings could house extended families, sometimes dozens of people related through the maternal line, living together under one roof, sharing food, warmth, and governance. Among the Haudenosaunee, each longhouse represented a clan, and each clan was part of a larger political and spiritual identity. The clans, such as Bear, Turtle, and Wolf, were matrilineal, and elders within them held great authority. Clan mothers chose the sachems, or chiefs who would speak for their people in council. It was not a system of kings and subjects, but of voice and consensus, of balance and duty. Nowhere was this more clearly expressed than in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, also known as the Iroquois League, a union of 5 nations, later 6 with the addition of the Tuscarora, believed to have been formed sometime between 1100 and 1450 CE, though oral histories place its founding even earlier. These nations, the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca, came together in a remarkable act of political vision, forging a great law of peace that bound them in mutual respect, shared governance, and collective decision making. Their model of governance was based on long deliberation and the consent of all, with leaders chosen not by force or inheritance, but by wisdom and the will of their people. The Tree of Peace, symbolizing the Confederacy, was said to have roots that reached in all directions, offering shelter to any who sought it. This league became a powerful force in the Northeast, both in diplomacy and in defense, and its structure would later inspire elements of the United States Constitution. Farther south, in the land of the Cherokee, a different but equally rich cultural pattern emerged. The Cherokee lived in settled towns with council houses at their center, built of wood and clay, surrounded by fields and forest. They had their own systems of clan and kinship, of leaderships and ritual, and a deep oral tradition that passed down myths, laws, and medicine. They, too, traced their ancestry through the mother's line. Their stories spoke of the creation of the mountains, of the sacred fire that must never be extinguished, and of the balance between all things. Balance, Duyuktuvo in the Cherokee language, was a central concept shaping ethics, behavior, and health. The world, they believed, must remain in harmony, and human action must always account for its effect on others and the natural world. Spirituality among the eastern woodlands peoples was deeply embedded in the natural world. There were ceremonies for planting and harvest, for dreams and visions, for naming and healing. The green corn ceremony, common among many tribes, marked the renewal of life, the arrival of the harvest, and the communal act of forgiveness and cleansing. Smoke from sacred fires rose into the canopy, carrying prayers to the Creator. Songs and dances, passed down through generations, echoed through the forest like the calls of birds or the wind in the trees. The land was alive. Every tree, every river, every stone had its own spirit, its own memory. Warfare, when it occurred, was governed by strict codes. Conflicts were often sparked by honor, revenge, or territorial tensions, but wars were not endless, and peace was pursued through ritualized diplomacy, gift-giving, and symbolic adoption. Prisoners could be executed, adopted, or even become full members of the community, depending on the will of the clan and the needs of the people. This flexibility, while foreign to European notions of justice, reflected a worldview focused on restoration and balance. By the time Europeans arrived on the eastern shores, they found a continent not of wandering tribes, but of organized societies, with laws, leaders, agriculture, trade, religion, and profound philosophical depth. And yet, these same Europeans would often ignore what they saw, dismissing indigenous cultures as primitive, their forests as empty, their stories as myth. But the truth, visible in every mound, every council fire, every enduring language, was far different. The eastern woodlands were never empty. They were full of life, of meaning, of civilization. Tonight, as you rest, Imagine walking through those forests, not as an explorer, but as a visitor, a guest. Hear the call of birds overhead, the hush of leaves underfoot, the low voices of elders speaking around the fire. Imagine the longhouses glowing from within, the scent of maize and smoke in the air. Let the trees rise around you like pillars of a cathedral older than stone. Let the voices of the forested nations wrap around your thoughts like a blanket of memory. And know that the roots of their wisdom still grow, deep, strong, and alive beneath the soil of the present. Chapter 6: The Plains Nations, Buffalo, Stars, and the Windswept World. There is a silence to the plains, not an emptiness, but a great breathing space. It stretches from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, from the Canadian prairie to the deserts of Texas, a land of tall grasses and wide skies, of storm and dust, and a horizon that never seems to end. Here, beneath that endless dome, live the Plains nations, cultures shaped not by stone cities or pyramids, but by movement, memory, and a relationship to the land so deep it was said that even the stars walked with them. The plains were not always the homeland of mounted warriors chasing bison across the open country. For thousands of years, long before the horse arrived, indigenous peoples lived here as farmers, hunters, and gatherers, their villages tucked along rivers, their stories rooted in the soil. By 500 CE, societies such as the Mandan, Arikara, and Hidatsa had begun to establish semi-permanent settlements along the Missouri River, where they built earth lodges, grew maize and beans, and traded with distant peoples. These communities were often peaceful, and their lives revolved around agriculture, kinship, and the great river's cycle. Further south and west, Caddoan cultures flourished in what is now Oklahoma and eastern Texas, while small nomadic bands lived in the drier plains, moving with the seasons, hunting deer and smaller game, gathering roots and berries, and maintaining complex social and spiritual traditions shaped by the vastness of space. Then, everything changed with the return of the horse. Though horses were native to the Americas in prehistoric times, they became extinct on the continent around 10,000 years ago, likely due to climate shifts and overhunting. It wasn't until the 16th century when Spanish explorers reintroduced them, descended from Iberian breeds brought to the New World, that the horse returned to North America. At first, they escaped or were stolen from colonial settlements. Then, they spread. Tribes adopted them, and in doing so, they transformed not only their way of travel, but their very way of life. By the early 18th century, tribes such as the Comanche, Lakota, Cheyenne, Crow, Blackfoot, and Kiowa had become masters of the plains, redefining their cultures around the horse and the buffalo. Mobility increased, territories expanded, social structures evolved. The open grasslands, once slow to cross on foot, became highways of migration, of trade, of war and ceremony. The buffalo, or American bison, became the heart of life, a provider of food, shelter, clothing, tools, and spiritual purpose. Nearly every part of the animal was used: hide for teepees, robes, drums, bones for tools and arrowheads, sinew for thread and bowstrings, horns for cups and headdresses. Even the bladder was used to carry water. To the plains peoples, the buffalo was not a resource. It was a relative, a sacred being who had given itself to the people. Its image appeared in stories, in dances, in medicine bundles carried with great care. Entire societies were built around its movement. And so, The hunt became more than survival. It became ceremony. Horses allowed for greater precision, speed, and efficiency, but even before the horse, buffalo were hunted using skillful communal strategies such as buffalo jumps, where herds were driven off cliffs by coordinated human effort, often followed by prayer, song, and reverent use of every part of the fallen. The people of the plains lived in teepees, cone shaped dwellings made of buffalo hides stretched over wooden poles, easy to set up and take down, ideal for a nomadic life. These were not crude shelters, but homes, often painted with family symbols or dream imagery, filled with sacred objects and arranged in circles that mirrored the sacred hoop of the world. The circle, in fact, was a central symbol among many plains cultures. It represented life, the sun, the horizon, the seasons, the unity of the people, and the movement of the stars. Life itself was seen as a circle, with birth, growth, death, and rebirth repeating endlessly. The sacred pipe, used in ceremonies, was passed in a circle. The dances spiraled in circles. Even time was not line, but a cycle, echoing the heartbeat of the world. Each tribe had its own stories, its own songs, but among many there was a shared reverence for the sky world, a belief that the stars were ancestors, that dreams were messages, that visions were a way to walk between realms. The Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota people, often grouped together as the Sioux, spoke of the star people, of constellations as maps of the soul, and of sacred places on earth, such as the Black Hills of South Dakota, that mirrored the patterns in the sky. The Milky Way was seen as the spirit road, the path that souls travel after death. In the great open dark of the plains, the stars were not distant. They were present, immediate, pulsing with meaning. Plains spirituality emphasized balance and relationship with the land, with animals, with spirits, and with the community. Ceremonies such as the sun dance, performed in the summer, brought the people together in acts of sacrifice, endurance, renewal, and prayer. Warriors might fast and pierce their flesh, not to prove bravery, but to offer suffering for the good of the people. The ritual, lasting several days, was conducted around a sacred tree, the axis of the world, and often accompanied by songs, drumming, and communal feasting. These were moments not only of religion, but of identity, affirmations of who the people were, and of their ongoing bond with the universe. Leadership among the plains peoples was often earned, not inherited. A man might gain respect by acts of generosity, wisdom, or courage. A woman might gain authority as a healer, a dream interpreter, or keeper of stories. The role of the shaman or medicine person was vital, someone who bridged the worlds, diagnosed illness, interpreted signs, and guided the people with knowledge passed down from visions, spirits, or years of apprenticeship. The medicine wheel, sometimes built in stone on mountain tops, was not a symbol to be read with the mind alone. It was to be walked, lived, and felt. As contact with Europeans increased through the 18th and 19th centuries, the life of the Plains nations began to change. Trade introduced guns, metal, and cloth, altering hunting practices and economic structures. Treaties were made and broken, diseases spread, conflicts escalated, the great herds of buffalo were slaughtered by settlers and commercial hunters, not for food, but for control. Between 1800 and 1885, the bison population plummeted from over 30 million to fewer than 1,000. With them fell the core of plains life. Yet even through tragedy, these nations endured. Some were forced onto reservations, others fled, but the songs did not stop. The ceremonies, sometimes banned, were carried on in secret, and today, across the plains, among the Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Blackfoot, the Crow, and many others, the old ways are being remembered, revived, and carried forward. So now, as you rest, let the plains unfold behind your eyes. Let the wind pass through tall grasses. Let a circle of teepees rise in the distance, smoke curling upward into a sky crowded with stars. Hear the hoofbeats of bison, the breath of horses, the low hum of a drum, and feel the vastness of the world, open and sacred. The sky is close tonight. The ancestors are near. The stars are not just lights, they are stories waiting. Chapter 7. The Pueblo Peoples, Sky Cities of the Desert. In the high desert plateaus of the American Southwest, where the land is carved by wind and time, and the sun moves slowly over mesas and canyons, there stand ruins of ancient dwellings, some tucked into cliffs like honeycombs, others rising like small cities from the dust and rock. These are the ancestral homes of the Pueblo peoples, whose roots stretch back thousands of years, deep into a landscape of sand-colored stone, azure skies, and silence vast enough to hold the voice of the gods. Long before the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, before the roads and railways cut through the desert, before even the great Mississippian cities rose in the east, there existed here a world of architects, farmers, astronomers, potters, and priests. These early peoples, often grouped under the archaeological names ancestral Puebloans, Hohokam, and Mogollon, created complex, enduring cultures in a land many would have called barren. But to them, the desert was alive. It offered beauty, mystery, and just enough to build a civilization if one knew how to listen. The story begins around 2000 BCE, when early communities began to transition from nomadic foraging to settled agriculture in the American Southwest, learning to grow maize, beans, squash, and cotton in the arid soil. Over centuries, as irrigation techniques advanced and water was drawn from rivers and diverted into fields, small hamlets grew into villages. Pottery developed, homes deepened from simple pit houses into surface dwellings of stone and adobe. By 750 CE, a distinct cultural tradition had taken shape, one that would soon create the cliff dwellings and ceremonial centers that still astound us today. The people we now call the ancestral Puebloans, once referred to as Anasazi, a term no longer preferred, began to build not only homes, but villages of great complexity, aligned to the movements of the sun and stars, their layout reflecting both communal needs and cosmological beliefs. Among their most astonishing achievements are the massive ruins of Chaco Canyon, located in present-day New Mexico. From around 850 to 1250 CE, Chaco was a cultural and ceremonial heart of the region, a center connected to dozens of outlying settlements by carefully engineered roads, some of them stretching for miles in perfectly straight lines through hills and desert. Great houses such as Pueblo Bonito, with over 600 rooms, multiple stories, and precise masonry, rose from the canyon floor like geometric echoes of the surrounding cliffs. These were not ordinary dwellings, but ceremonial hubs, places of gathering, trade, ritual, and perhaps governance. Their construction required coordination, labor, and a shared spiritual vision. Archaeological studies reveal that the buildings were aligned with solstices and lunar cycles, the windows and walls marking key celestial events. The people of Chaco tracked the heavens not for curiosity, but for guidance. Time was sacred, and the sky was a calendar written in light. Across the broader region, kivas were built. Circular, often subterranean ceremonial chambers entered through ladders in the roof, with a sipapu, a small hole in the floor symbolizing the portal from the underworld, the place of origin in Pueblo cosmology. In these spaces, rituals were performed, decisions were made, and stories were passed down. The kiva was more than a room. It was a cosmic center, a place where the earthly and the spiritual met, where the community remembered who they were and where they had come from. To the north, in the cliffs of Mesa Verde, the ancestral Puebloans built entire towns into the rock face. Beginning around 1100 CE, they carved and constructed cliff dwellings, such as Cliff Palace and Spruce Tree House, with walls of stone mortared carefully into alcoves that provided shelter from sun and snow alike. The effect is haunting. Entire communities perched on stone ledges, reached by ladders and handholds carved into the cliff. These dwellings were not only defensible, they were in harmony with the landscape, adapted to its contours, hidden within its bones. At their height, thousands lived in these high places, growing crops on the mesa tops, storing food in cool stone niches, telling stories as the wind whispered through canyon corridors. But by the late 13th century, something shifted. The ancestral Puebloans began to leave their great settlements, not suddenly, not all at once, but gradually, in response to changes in climate, rainfall, and perhaps social or spiritual factors we cannot fully know. Drought may have played a role, so may conflict or the exhaustion of local resources. The people dispersed, moving south and east, forming the ancestral lineages of the modern-day Pueblo nations, including the Hopi, Zuni, Acoma, Taos, and others, who still live in the southwest today in villages that have been continuously inhabited for centuries. Acoma Pueblo, for example, has been occupied for over 1,000 years, perched on a sandstone mesa, its adobe houses basking in the sun, its people still walking the same paths their ancestors once did. Pueblo culture is deeply spiritual, rooted in balance, reciprocity, and relationship with the natural world. The land is not merely land, it is sacred. Every mesa, every canyon, every rain cloud is part of a larger whole. The people do not separate the spiritual from the daily. They live their prayers, walk their stories, and honor the seasons with ceremonies that continue to this day. The Kachina tradition, central to many Pueblo groups, teaches that spiritual beings inhabit the natural world, and that through masked dances and ritual, these spirits can be honored, invoked, and invited to help bring rain, fertility, and harmony. The dances are not performances. They are acts of communion between human and divine, between past and present, between earth and sky. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they were astonished to find multi-story buildings, carefully planned communities, and a sophisticated society rooted in tradition and cosmology. They tried to suppress Pueblo religion, demolish kivas, and impose new gods. But the spirit of the people endured. In 1680, the Pueblos led one of the most successful uprisings against colonial rule in North American history, the Pueblo Revolt, which drove the Spanish from the region for over a decade. It was not merely a rebellion against violence. It was a defense of memory, of culture, of the sacred. Today, In the modern day pueblos, scattered across New Mexico and Arizona, the traditions continue. The pottery, the weaving, the corn dances, the sunrise prayers, they are not museum pieces. They are living acts. And though the world around them has changed, the Pueblo peoples remain quiet, resilient, rooted like the mesas themselves. So tonight, as you rest, imagine the soft glow of the desert at dusk, the walls of adobe tinted rose by the setting sun, a kiva below, its fire casting shadows across ancient stone, the stars rising above the canyon rim, watched by those who once carved their homes into the rock. Let the stillness of the southwest wrap around you. Let the wind carry old songs through your dreams. For in the high places of the desert, time does not pass. It circles, and the sky cities still remember. Chapter 8. The Northwest Coast, Totem, Salmon, and the Spirit of the Sea. Where the forests meet the sea, where mist drapes the mountains, and the ocean breathes in steady rhythm against the rocky shores, there flourished a world unlike any other in North America. A coastal realm of towering cedar trees, icy rivers, and villages built where land and water speak in tides. This was the home of the indigenous peoples of the Northwest Coast, stretching from present day Northern California to southern Alaska. In this narrow strip of rainforest, hemmed in by the Pacific Ocean and the snow capped peaks of the Coast Range, lived cultures of immense richness, not built around agriculture or cities, but around abundance and memory and deep spiritual bonds with sea, forest, and sky. Here, the Haida, Tlingit, Tsimshian, Kwakwakawaku, Nuchanolth, and many others developed societies that were at once rooted and mobile, fluid and ceremonial, bound by lineage and shaped by the rhythms of nature. Long before European contact in the late 18th century, long before maps or ships came northward, these peoples were crafting art, shaping clan systems, navigating treacherous waters, and honoring the great cycles of life and death with ceremony, myth, and song. At the center of life here was not a crop or a monument, but a creature, the salmon. These silvery travelers, returning each year from the ocean to spawn in the rivers where they were born, were more than food. They were sacred beings, gifts from the spirit world, who offered themselves again and again to the people if treated with gratitude and respect. Salmon shaped the calendar, the feast, the rhythm of the village. The first salmon ceremony, practiced across many coastal nations, was a solemn ritual of welcome and honor, involving song, dance, and prayer before the year's first catch was eaten. The bones were returned to the river, often whole and carefully preserved, so that the salmon's spirit could return to the sea and be reborn. To live here was not to take from the land, but to be in covenant with it, a relationship of reverence and renewal, echoed in every story, every carving, every gesture of daily life. Villages were composed of large plank houses, made from the immense trunks of red and yellow cedar trees. These houses were not only dwellings, but vessels of identity. Carved posts supported the structure, painted designs adorned the exteriors, and the interior was arranged to reflect social status and clan heritage. Extended families lived together, bound by matrilineal descent and governed by systems of potlatch, ceremonial gatherings of giving, where wealth was distributed, names were passed, marriages arranged, and memories preserved. In the potlatch, status was not gained by hoarding, but by giving, by displaying generosity, by showing that one could provide, and by keeping the memory of the ancestors alive through songs, masks, and shared story. The art of the Northwest Coast is among the most distinctive and powerful in the indigenous world. Totem poles, perhaps the most iconic expression of this tradition, stood before homes, at burial sites, and in sacred spaces, not as idols, but as heralds of lineage, story, and myth. Each pole was a vertical narrative carved from a single cedar trunk, bearing figures of animals, humans, supernatural beings, the raven, the bear, the eagle, the killer whale, the thunderbird, each representing a chapter of a story, a crest of a clan, or a being from the mythic time when animals and people still spoke the same language. These figures were not simply decorative, they were alive with meaning, understood deeply within the oral traditions of each community, and often known only to those who had inherited the right to tell the stories they contained. Spirituality on the Northwest Coast was deeply embedded in the natural world and in transformation. Shamans, or spirit doctors, acted as mediators between the human and supernatural realms. They healed the sick, interpreted dreams, and performed rituals to maintain harmony between people and spirits. Masks, carved from cedar and painted with bold flowing lines, were worn in ceremonies to embody these beings, often with mechanical elements that allowed them to shift during performance, revealing new faces, hidden creatures, or spirits emerging from within. This was not theater, it was cosmology made visible. In these dances, the veil between worlds was lifted. The story was not just told, it was inhabited. Trade and travel were constant. Long canoes, carved from single cedar trees and sometimes reaching 50 feet in length, glided across the coastal waters, connecting villages, carrying goods, and sometimes warriors. These canoes were masterpieces of both engineering and art, their prows often shaped like wolves or sea monsters, their movements swift and silent through fog and tide. Trade routes reached far inland and down the coast, exchanging not just tools and ornaments, but songs, stories, marriages, and political alliances. Wealth was measured in copper shields, woven blankets, and ceremonial regalia, items imbued with spirit and story passed down through generations. When the first European explorers arrived in the late 18th century, they found a people already sophisticated in governance, philosophy, and social organization. But as elsewhere, contact brought disruption. Disease swept through villages, taking thousands. Missionaries sought to erase language and ceremony. Colonial governments outlawed the potlatch, seeing it as wasteful or subversive. Totem poles were chopped down or sold to museums. Children were taken from their families and sent to residential schools, forbidden to speak their language or practice their traditions. The scars of these acts remain, and yet, so too does the spirit. Today, the peoples of the Northwest Coast are reclaiming what was nearly lost. Potlatches have returned stronger than before. New totem poles are raised. Ancient songs are sung again. Artists carve, paint, and dance in the footsteps of their ancestors. Languages once silenced are being taught again in schools, in homes, in the whisper of tide and cedar wind. The stories never died, they waited, like salmon beneath the current, like embers in dry moss, for the right moment to rise again. So tonight, as you rest, drift toward the sound of waves on stone, the scent of cedar smoke, the hush of rain in the forest. See the carved face of the raven watching from a totem pole. Hear the paddles striking water as a canoe slips through the mist. Imagine a longhouse glowing with firelight, the shadows of dancers moving to a rhythm older than memory. The sea is still speaking, the salmon are still returning, and the spirit of the coast, carved in wood, sung in wind, dreamt in waves, remains. Chapter 9: The Desert Peoples, Spirit Roads, and Painted Canyons. Beneath the blazing sun and open skies of the American Southwest lies a landscape shaped by wind and time, by red rock mesas, deep canyons, and stretch of arid ground where silence has a texture all its own. It is a place of extremes, heat and shadow, dryness and flood, vastness and intimacy. And within this desert, from what is now southern Arizona and New Mexico into northern Mexico, live the desert peoples, ancient cultures, whose wisdom allowed them to thrive in lands where others saw only hardship. Here, long before air conditioning or asphalt, civilizations rose along riverbanks and in canyon walls, building homes of adobe and stone, carving art into cliffs, and weaving their lives into the pulse of the desert. Among them were the Hohokam, the Mogollon, and the early ancestors of the modern Tohono O'odham, Zuni, and Hopi peoples. Their story is not written in epic wars or vast conquests, but in canals, in corn, in paint and pattern, in a way of life attuned to every drop of water and every whisper of wind. The Hohokam, whose name means those who have gone in the O'odham language, emerged as early as 300 BCE and flourished until around 1450 Sau'i, building one of the most advanced irrigation networks in prehistoric North America. In the harsh Sonoran Desert, near present-day Phoenix, they engineered hundreds of miles of canals, diverting the waters of the Salt and Gila rivers to irrigate fields of maize, beans, squash, and cotton. These canals, dug by hand, carried water across great distances, allowing for stable farming communities to thrive in an environment that receives less than 10 inches of rain per year. The scale of their achievement is staggering, wide enough to float wooden rafts, deep enough to serve generations. And around these canals, the Hohokam built ball courts, platform mounds, and villages connected by footpaths and trade routes, forming a complex society with regional centers, ceremonial traditions, and far-reaching influence. Their pottery, often decorated in red on buff geometric patterns, reflected both artistic refinement and a deep sense of symmetry and order. To the east, the Mogollon culture developed in the highlands of what is now southwestern New Mexico and southeastern Arizona from roughly 200 CAE to 1400 CE. Their early dwellings were pit houses dug into the earth, but by 1000 CE, they began to construct above-ground villages of stone and adobe, often near springs or canyon streams. The Mogollon are especially known for their black-on-white painted pottery, featuring bold, abstract designs and animal motifs, intricate spirals, stepped lines, and repeating patterns that seem almost mathematical, as though the potters were recording a rhythm only they could hear. In the Mimbres Valley, the Mogollon left behind a collection of pottery so delicate and haunting that each piece feels like a message. An owl's wide eyes, a fish caught mid-leap, a dancer's flowing form, all painted on bowls that were often pierced at the center and placed over the faces of the dead, a ritual perhaps meant to release the spirit or allow it to see into the next world. And then, across the cliffs and mesas, there were the ancient roads, not for trade or conquest, but for spirit. Archaeologists have traced hundreds of miles of ceremonial roads radiating outward from Chaco Canyon and other sacred sites. These roads are often straight, uncannily so, cutting through hills rather than curving around them, sometimes leading not to another village, but to an empty point in the desert, a mountain peak, or a vanished shrine. What were these roads for? Some believe they were pilgrimage paths, ways of walking the cosmos, physical expressions of sacred journeys mirrored in myth and memory. Others suggest they were lines of power, mapping the flow of spiritual energy across the land. And still others say they were processional routes, walked by dancers in ceremony, footsteps echoing on packed earth beneath the open sky. Whatever their purpose, they reveal a worldview in which movement itself was sacred, where walking the land was a form of prayer. Rock art, known as petroglyphs and pictographs, also fills this region, carved or painted onto canyon walls, boulders, and cliff faces, some of it dating back thousands of years. Spirals, horned figures, stars, animals, handprints, and abstract forms emerge from the stone like fragments of dream. At sites like Newspaper Rock, Chaco Canyon, and Canyon de Chelly, these markings speak across time, silent but eloquent, layered over centuries as generations return to the same sacred places. Some may have recorded stories, maps, visions, or celestial events. Others may have been personal, markings of identity or memory. But all of them suggest a relationship between people and place that was deeply reciprocal. The land was not a backdrop, it was a canvas of spirit. Among the living descendants of these ancient cultures, the traditions endure. The Zuni and Hopi peoples, whose ancestors once lived in places like Homolovi and Awadavi, still maintain villages in northern Arizona and New Mexico that have been continuously inhabited for centuries. Their languages, ceremonies, and seasonal calendars remain intact, passed down through families, whispered into the morning wind, danced into the dust of plazas that have seen more winters than any written record could contain. Their homes, made of adobe and stone, rise in tiers, sun-warmed and wind-carved, overlooking the desert valleys like living monuments to endurance. Spiritual life among the desert peoples is centered on balance, harmony, and the unseen world. Rain is not merely weather, it is a gift. Corn is not merely food, it is a being. Songs are not merely entertainment, they are tools of connection, of invocation, of remembering. Ceremonies are held to bring rain, to honor the ancestors, to guide the crops, to tell the sacred stories of emergence, tales in which the people came up from the underworld into this world through a sipapu, emerging like seeds into sunlight. And just as the stories speak of emergence, so too does the land itself, layered, ancient, shaped by fire and erosion and time. Every mesa, every canyon, every dry arroyo holds memory. When the Spanish arrived in the 1500s, they did not understand this world. They called the people pagan, their kivas heathen shrines, their rain dances superstition. They destroyed, converted, renamed, but the memory did not fade. It went underground, hidden, protected, whispered until it could rise again. And rise it did. Today, the songs are still sung, the roads are still walked, the pottery is still shaped by hand and painted with the same ancient spirals. The desert is not empty. It is full of breath, of prayer, of presence. So as you drift tonight, let the red rock cliffs rise around you. Let the air grow dry and still. See the spiral etched into stone, glowing faintly beneath the moon. Hear the rustle of corn in a windless field, the rattle of a gourd, the soft crunch of sandals on a ceremonial path. Somewhere beneath the surface, the old road waits. It is not forgotten. It leads to the place where spirit meets earth, where silence becomes song, and where every grain of sand remembers the footsteps of those who walked with purpose, with patience, and with praise. Chapter 10: Sacred Beliefs and Mythic Worlds, Visions, Cycles, and the Spirit that Lives in All Things. To the indigenous peoples of North America, the world was not divided between sacred and ordinary. The world itself was sacred. From the plains to the forests, from deserts to coastlines, belief was not something separate from life. It was life. The land was alive, the sky was full of stories, and the spirits of ancestors walked alongside the living, unseen but ever present. Creation stories varied between nations, but many spoke of emergence, of people rising from the underworld into this world, born of earth and sky. Among the Hopi, the people emerged through a reed from a lower world, guided by spirit beings. Among the Iroquois, the world began on the back of a turtle, with a sky woman who fell from the heavens and gave birth to all that would be. The cosmos was organized not by hierarchy, but by relationship. Animals, trees, rivers, clouds, all had spirit, all could teach. Dreams were respected as messages. Visions, often sought through fasting or isolation, were portals to deeper understanding. A child's first dream might shape their path in life. A shaman's vision might guide an entire village. Among the Lakotas, the concept of Wakan Tanka, the Great Mystery, referred not to a god in the Western sense, but to a sacred force present in everything. The medicine wheel represented harmony and seasons, directions, and stages of life, a perfect circle reflecting the wholeness of existence. Ceremonies, from sweat lodges to sun dances, from story circles to healing songs, connected the people to spirit, to each other, and to the land. These were not performances. They were acts of balance, offerings of presence, and reminders that human beings are but one thread in a much greater pattern. In a world shaped by cycles of moon and sun, of life and death, of planting and harvest, indigenous beliefs provided not only explanations, but ways of living, with humility, gratitude, and deep listening. The sacred was not in some distant heaven. It was in the stone beneath your foot, in the fire's warmth, in the breath you draw. Chapter 11: The Coming of the Others, Contact, Collapse, and Survival. It began, as great changes often do, with a distant sound, the whisper of sails on the sea, the flash of metal in the sun, the ripple of a rumor carried upriver. Long before European ships made landfall across the eastern shores of North America, the ancestors of the First Nations felt the wind begin to shift. Trade goods arrived before the traders. Stories of pale-skinned men with thunder in their hands traveled faster than their footsteps. But no one could have foreseen the scale of what was coming, the upheaval, the sorrow, and the survival that would define the centuries to come. When the first sustained contacts began in the 1500s and 1600s, indigenous nations met these newcomers with a range of responses: curiosity, hospitality, caution, resistance. In many regions, gifts were exchanged and alliances were formed, often based on mutual interest in trade. The French sought furs, the English sought land, the Spanish sought souls. But to the people of this land, the visitors were something else entirely, bearers of an unknown world, walking with unknowable intentions. The most devastating arrival came unseen: disease. European plagues, carried across oceans and along trade routes, struck communities with no immunity. Smallpox, influenza, measles, and typhus spread with terrifying speed. Villages that had stood for generations vanished in weeks. Elders, knowledge keepers, were lost. Children died before their names could be remembered. In some regions, between 75% and 90% of the indigenous population perished. These epidemics shattered not only bodies, but traditions. With each grave dug, a library of knowledge was buried, rituals forgotten, songs silenced, family lines broken. And yet, the story did not end there. With tragedy came resistance. With invasion came resilience. As colonial powers pushed inland, claiming territories, building forts, and drawing lines on maps that ignored every existing reality, indigenous nations responded with diplomacy, adaptability, and defiance. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy, also known as the Iroquois, skillfully negotiated with French, British, and Dutch powers, often playing them against one another to preserve their sovereignty. The Powhatan Confederacy, in what is now Virginia, initially offered food and guidance to English settlers, only to face betrayal and warfare in return. The Wampanoag, whose people helped the Pilgrims survive their first brutal winters, were later decimated in King Philip's War, one of the bloodiest conflicts per capita in American history. By the 1700s, colonization had deepened. Treaties were signed and broken. Lands were ceded under pressure, sometimes unknowingly, sometimes by force. The doctrine of discovery, a papal edict adopted into colonial law, declared that Christian nations had the right to claim any unoccupied land, which conveniently ignored the lives, villages, and civilizations already thriving there. Violence became policy. Scalp bounties were issued. Forced removals began. In the 19th century, the push west intensified. The U.S. government enacted the Indian Removal Act of 1830, leading to the forced displacement of tens of thousands of native people from their ancestral homelands. Among them were the Cherokee, who were marched westward along the Trail of Tears, a brutal journey in which over 4,000 died from exposure, starvation, and disease. Others followed: the Muskogee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole, all driven from the east into designated Indian territory. The Plains nations, too, came under siege. The near total slaughter of the buffalo, from tens of millions to near extinction in just a few decades, was not merely economic. It was strategic. By destroying the buffalo, colonial forces aimed to starve and break the cultures that depended on them. The Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and others resisted with strength and dignity. But by the 1890s, after conflicts like Little Bighorn and the massacre at Wounded Knee, the era of military resistance came to a close. But the most insidious form of destruction came not through weapons, but through assimilation. Boarding schools and residential schools, operated by church and state, took children from their families. Their hair was cut, their names were changed, their languages banned, their culture punished. Kill the Indian, save the man was the policy. Generations were traumatized. And yet, even here, in these places of silence and shame, the spark did not go out. Not all stories of this era are ones of loss. Some are stories of survival in the most profound sense. Nations hid their ceremonies, kept languages alive in whispered conversations, reformed communities in exile rebuilt what had been broken. Pueblo peoples rose up in the 1680 revolt, reclaiming their temples and traditions for over a decade. Northwest Coast peoples kept their potlatches alive underground. The Hopi kept their kachina dances alive in secret. Elders carried memory like a flame cupped in their hands. Today, the legacy of contact is still unfolding. Injustice remains, but so does resistance, so does resurgence. Tribes are reclaiming land, languages are being revitalized, youth are learning the dances and names and medicines their ancestors carried through the fire. What was meant to be forgotten is being remembered. So tonight, as you close your eyes, do not imagine the old world vanishing into silence. Instead, imagine a thread, frayed but never broken, stretching from the past into the present, carried by voices, by breath, by love, woven into songs, into land, into the names still spoken beneath stars. The others came, but the people remained. Chapter 12: Echoes in the Land, Legacy, Revival, and Remembering. The old cities have faded, the mounds are overgrown, the cliff dwellings are silent, but the people, the stories, remain. Across North America today, over 500 federally recognized tribes in the United States, and hundreds more in Canada and Mexico, carry the memory of civilizations once called lost. They are not gone. They live in powwows and naming ceremonies, in language classes, in basket weaving, in the revival of potlatch, kiva dances, medicine wheels, and canoe journeys. Young people learn the songs of their grandparents. Elders pass on the stories of the stars, the buffalo, the serpent mound. Artists carve, bead, paint, and speak the truths that were once silenced. Nations demand recognition, not as shadows of the past, but as sovereign, living cultures. The land remembers too, in the forests and rivers, in the dust of the plains, and the stillness of the desert. The breath of the ancestors lingers. If you walk softly, if you listen well, you can still hear it. The echo of drums, the whisper of prayers, the rhythm of footsteps that shaped the continent long before maps gave it borders. And so now, as you rest, let this knowledge settle like dust on a canyon wall. You have walked with the people of the stars, the forests, the seas. They are not lost, they are here, in the wind, in the ground, and in the quiet that follows the final word. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Academy of Sleep to continue this journey into the world of knowledge and mysteries. Your subscription helps us create more calming lectures and keep the channel growing with peaceful, thoughtful content. And if you'd like to leave a token of kindness by the fireside, you'll find a link to buy me a coffee in the description. Until next time.